Good afternoon. Today is Wednesday, the 9th of March, 2016. Thank you for joining us for our Technology Wednesday webinar, Adding Technology to Poetry Month. This is a fun webinar for us to do, and we're glad that some of you were able to join us. We've got a few people out there. Before we get started, so we can have a sense of our audience, if you will type into the text chat box what school you're from, it gives us a little sense of who it is that we're speaking to. So go ahead and enter into the text chat box what school you're from. We've got a couple from Tarleton Elementary, Kenny Gwynn Middle School. Thomas joins us for all of our webinars from NVLA. We're glad to have him. Guy Elementary, another Tarleton Elementary, Goins, O'Callahan Middle School, Tarkanian Middle School, Mountain View Elementary School, Cynthia. Wow, I actually went to kindergarten there at Mountain View a long time ago. Claude Perkins, Farron, Cheyenne High School. All right. We're glad to have you with us to talk about how we can use technology with poetry. I am Mark Oakton, the coordinator with the Instructional Design and Professional Learning Division, who has responsibilities with instructional technology. We have 4 of our digital learning coaches with us today: Nicole Alexander, Julie Jones, Lisa Widmer, and Marianne Stargell. Just like we'd like to have an idea of who it is we're speaking to, I like to put our pictures up there so that you can get a sense of who we are, and maybe recognize us when we're out at one of your schools. Alrighty. Now we're talking about Poetry Month. Since I believe it was in 2006, nationally we had Poetry Month established, and every year it is in the month of April. So this is our last webinar before April, and because of spring break coming up, we're not having a second webinar this month, and we want to take a few minutes of your time to talk about how you can incorporate poetry technology into your teaching of poetry as we celebrate National Poetry Month next month. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Good afternoon.
Actually, Lisa, can I interrupt you one more time?
Oh, sure, sorry.
I forgot my important orders of business. If you are watching this live, at the end of the webinar, please make sure that you click the red X that says exit. Don't just close your app window at the end of the session. Click the red X that says exit so that it makes sure that the attendance is recorded properly. For those of you who are viewing this in playback, and this is how I know if you were actually listening to the playback and paying attention, or if you just put it on in the background while you were doing other things. The webinar, in the bottom right-hand corner, you have a button that says Log Attendance and Exit. You need to click that at the end of your session to have your attendance recorded properly. We give teachers 2 weeks to view the playback before we submit the attendance to be uploaded into Pathlore. So do not expect your attendance to be, and we have spring break coming up, so don't expect your attendance to go into Pathlore until the end of the month. So if I get an email from you this week or next week, I'll know that you weren't actually listening. So please don't be that person. And I'll give myself another laugh at my bad jokes. All right, thank you, Lisa. Go ahead.
No problem. My name is Lisa Widmer, and I'm a digital learning coach. And this afternoon we're going to start off with listening and technology. And I have a few websites that I want to share with you. There are so many great resources there. But the first one I want to show you is just YouTube. YouTube has an abundance of media and some excellent resources there. I just went in and you just search children's poetry, and one of the first ones, and a really good one I found, was this one by Steve Atwell. And you can see which ones I watched. It's nice in YouTube because you can see exactly how long each of their little clips are. You can just do a lot of exploring here. One of the ones I wanted to show you, and I thought this was really a cute one, and I'm just going to play it. It's 1:30, which is real nice. It's adorable. I mean, you get the idea. For children's poetry, it's nice when they listen to the poetry to hear the rhyme and the rhythm. Um, he has so many different resources here. We can go back and we can look. Um, you can look through and find some. One of the ones I wanted to show you. Let's see. Here's another one. Let's say his all kind of start the same, but let's say I wanted to watch Desmond the Christmas Fairy, and I wanted to save it. I wanted to share it with someone. Again, in YouTube, you have some real nice share options as far as copying a link and sharing it with someone. You can give it a thumbs up, a thumbs down. This guy I liked well enough that I subscribed to him so that I'll get his things. But one nice feature when you do use YouTube is you do have the Add To feature. So within the Add To feature, I can add it to a playlist I already have, or I can create a new playlist. If I want to create a new playlist, I can just easily type it in there, create, and now I've added it to that playlist. When I want to go back to it later, I can just click on the 3 lines or the little hamburger, go to my channel, and from my channel, I have my little created playlist of poetry with just my one video in it. So it makes it a really nice feature that I can find things and then go back to them and play them for classes. A second website I wanted to show you for listening was this listening page from Josie's Poems. This site was created by Josie Whitehead. She is kind of an interesting person in her own right. She's a retired teacher, and after she had retired, she had her local elementary or the primary school, because she's I think British, but she the kids would come to her and say, could you give me a poem? Could you write me a poem? And so she started writing poetry for those kids. And so if you look on her website, she has preschool, primary school, and then secondary school. So she writes all the way into the young teen age group. But she has more than 1,200 poems on this site, which I thought was really cool. This is just the listening page, so this is just a small portion of it. With hers, though, once you find one that you like this onomatopoeia one is always pretty cool for those secondary people. If you click on her, on the link, it downloads as an MP3. And so then to play it, you just double click it. I don't know if you can hear that, but
No, we're not able to hear it.
I'm sorry.
One of the downsides of using Saba is that we can't actually hear.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Sounds.
So I have it here. Now I can't stop it. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we hear you, just not the.
Okay, I just muted that.
Sound comes from your system.
But it downloads as an MP3, which makes it nice because you can share it, and it's easy to replay whenever you're ready to. So I like that part about this site. But she also has more and a lot of resources on poetry if you go to her other pages. This is just the listening portion of her page. The last website I wanted to show you was the one from the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress actually has quite a few archived recordings, and they go back as far as like 1943. There's resources and references there. Of course, it's all for educational purposes. You're not supposed to be selling anything. But if you find
Lisa, you're cutting out a little bit. You're cutting out, Lisa. Do you want to check
Of
your...
course, you won't be able to views. I had
Lisa,
this
do you
really
want to check
great
your
one with
mic real
Robert
fast?
Frost I was going to share with you, but you can't hear it, so it's not going to help. But I mean, you can hear Robert Frost, tell his own poem and read his own poetry. So, I mean, I think that's pretty impressive and pretty powerful just to get to hear it from the actual poet. It's the same with Josie's. I mean, she's obviously, when you listen to it, it's her recording her own poetry for those kids. So there's some really great resources out there, and I'm sorry you can't hear them, but you'll get the resources at the end, and when you do get them, make sure that you listen. So I'm going to click. Okay, are we back? Can you hear me? Oh no.
Yes, we can hear you. You're there.
Sorry, I'm just rattling. It's like I can't hear you. I muted that too. Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. All right. Marianne, you are up talking about Google and poetry.
All right, let's give this a try here. My first go at a central session. So Google is wonderful. I absolutely love Google. And if you're using Google Classroom or Google Drive with your students, there's a great way to have students collaborate, interact, and present poetry. We actually have some templates for you. And I'm going to be looking at this section right here in our lovely little Symbaloo that we will be sharing with you at the end of the session. And the first one I'm going to look at is actually called Shake Up Learning, and it's a website, and they have something called Collaborative Magnetic Poetry with Google Drawings. And it's a Google Drawings template that's already been built for you, or you can actually, once you see this, you can build your own template. So you just click right here to make a copy of the template, and it comes up like this. And as long as you're logged into your Google Drive account, you can just click Make a Copy, and up this pops. Now, I've actually gone in and added a couple of my own text boxes already because you can tell the difference between the ones that were created by Shake Up Learning and the ones that I created. And I do love Google, so Google is my life is, what I've added on here. And you can have the students, work in pairs, or you can put this up on the main screen in the classroom and have them work as a whole class. And then you can actually take this one step further and have students create their own version of magnetic poetry using a Google Drawings and words from a book or subject they're studying in class. Have your students search for a photo that would make a good refrigerator door, and then you can even have them take text boxes with all the different words and create their own poetry and share it with others, or share the actual document with someone else in their class and have their friends make poetry with the words that they created. Another idea is, or another template is this poetry project. Now these we actually found by searching in Google Templates. And this one allows your students to analyze a poet or poetry. And this actually is a group project. So each student in the group has different, the groups decide who's going to be responsible for what. And they actually can come in here and research an author, and then they will actually paraphrase the poem. So they actually bring in the poem line by line or stanza by stanza, and then they paraphrase it over on this side. So it's a great project for the kids to work on, especially some of the junior high, high school students. The next one is poetry templates. This can be used for all students to help them write their own poetry. It's a simple template that has structured guides for a haiku, acrostic, a sonnet, and a narrative. And then the final template is a poetry portfolio. And this is actually built so that it has the directions built right into it. It's an ongoing project for the students. And they can find poems by other people. So a poem that made me laugh, a poem that made me think. So they type the poem over here, and then they have to explain what made them choose the poem. And then as they go on, they actually have a section where they're writing poetry inspired by the different poems that they've found, and then inspired by a picture that they find, and then they just have some free writing poem areas. With all of these, you can use them directly in Google Classroom. If you're using Google Classroom, you can just tell Google, to make each student their own copy. And if you're interested in learning more about Google Classroom or Google Drive with your students, definitely contact one of your digital learning coaches and have them help you out. All right. See if I can quit app share. There we go. All right, Mark, back to you.
Actually, we will send it over to Julie, talking about some apps to be used with poetry.
Good afternoon. This is Julie Jones, digital learning coach. And so I am going to talk about poetry and apps. Read, Write, Think has a series of apps that are available for publishing. They're available both as an app that you can put on a device, such as an iPad or an Android device, and they're available online. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the online and how you would get to that, but just remember you can also download the apps for your iPad. So I would start out by going to readwritethink.org. This is their homepage. You'll notice over here on the left side, I can search by keyword. So I'm going to go ahead and put in poetry. And I'm just going to hit the go button. And when I do that, it gives me 324 results. So if you'll notice on the left side, there are filters that I'm able to refine my search by. So I could do it by grade level. One of the things that we really liked that we found when we were putting this together was looking at lesson plans. So there are 177 lesson plans. Some of them go along with the apps that I'm going to show you, and some of them are separate. Like the top one says Talking Poetry with Blaberize, which is a separate website. But the one that I like, the mobile apps are listed here as well. But we're going to go, if you were doing this online, you would do it through the Student Interactive. And so there's different types. There's a letter poem creator. We're going to go ahead and take a look at the theme poem. So one of the things that I like about Read, Write, Think is it's very similar to how the app looks. So here online looks similar to how it would look when you're in the app. I'm going to go ahead and say get started. And so the first thing it's going to have me do is put in my name, and then I'm going to continue. And it shows me an example of a theme poem. And then I can choose what I would like to do. I'm going to go with sports, and I'm going to choose volleyball. So it has me brainstorm some words that go along with volleyball. So I'll just put spike, serve, hit, bump, and then I can continue. So that's not writing my poem, that is just brainstorming. So I can put the title of my poem here. And then I serve, I hit, I set, I spike, I score. So I don't have to use all these words, but they're there just to remind me of what I brainstormed. Then I can hit finish. Once I finish, my choices are to print it, save a final draft, just save the draft, or share the final. Most of the time you're probably going to send it to the printer. If you were doing this on an iPad, you would save the final and it actually saves it as a JPEG in the camera roll. So that's read, write, think. And it has a number of different types of apps available. So we just looked at the theme poem, but there's the haiku, acrostic, diamante. All of those would be available to you. A couple other apps. These are available only as for iDevices. Are Poetry Everywhere and Poetry. Poetry Everywhere is a collection of short poetry videos, and that it's being read by the author. So just like Lisa was talking about earlier, it's really nice to hear the author read those poems. So that's one of those apps that you can have the author reading it. And then Poetry is by the Poetry Foundation, has a collection of both classic and newer poems. And I would recommend both of these apps most likely for older students. It didn't seem to have a huge selection for your younger children, so middle school and up. And now we are on to publishing tools, which would be Nicole, I believe.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be going over some tools that your students can use for publishing their poetry. All right, so the first one I'm going to share with everybody is Storybird. Storybird is a website that lets anyone make visual stories and poems in just seconds. What they do is they curate artwork from illustrators and animators around the world for other people to use in their own poetry or story writing. Professional artwork is used by students. That way they can draw them quickly into the writing process. Storybird works on just about any device, so teachers can use the free tools included in Storybird for managing the students, creating assignments, and building an online class library using the Storybird Studio. They can also keep students engaged by issuing writing challenges and reviewing and sharing the work right in Storybird. Storybird does not collect any private data from the students, so it's completely safe for the kids to use and teachers as well. Storybird is also free for educators. In fact, they will even pay you to use their website in the form of fundraising. They allow you to create the books and sell them as using the students' work, their poetry, or their stories, and to sell that poetry as a fundraiser for the school. When you log into Storybird within your own teacher account, they can do picture books, long-form books, and poetry. When you go into poetry, as you can see, I'm logged into my account here. You go through Show Me, and the kids go through, and if they wanted to use this artwork in a poem, it brings up the image and the words are along the side that they can use. So it's kind of like the magnetic poetry, only with artwork done by professional artists to help the kids write their poems. So that is Storybird. The next site that I was going to show you is called Writing with Writers, and it's hosted on the Scholastic Teacher website. In this website, students can study poetry by taking part in step-to-step workshops with their favorite authors. So, for example, if you follow along with Jack Perlusky, you can see the poems that he has written and listen to some of the poems that he's done. and he gives his advice on how his writing process goes when he's writing some poetry. And the final step is that the kids actually get to write their own poems and publish it as well. Of course, it is reviewed before it's submitted, but it's another place for the kids to submit writing to actually have their poetry published. Next, I have a couple of the sites that allow you or your students to submit their work for publication. The first one is Poetic Power, hosted by Creative Communications. This website allows teachers to submit student work for publication in an actual print anthology book. It's a contest that's open to all grade levels, kinder through 12th, and there are multiple awards that are broken down by grade level. Both the teachers and the students can win prizes if the students' poems are chosen to be published in the anthology. It is judged by other educators, elementary through high school teachers, work for the company and judge the poetry, and it's not an everybody who enters wins. Only about 45% of the people who enter are actually published. And again, if it's broken down into grade level divisions, and the students will win $25 plus a copy of the book that their poem is published in, and teachers can earn free classroom supplies. And the final website I was going to show you for publishing is called Teen Ink. And Teen Ink is a national teen magazine, book series, and website devoted entirely to teenage writing. They have no staff writers or artists. They depend completely on the submissions from teenagers around the world for their contests. The Young Authors Foundation is actually a nonprofit organization that supports Teen Ink. It's completely devoted to helping teens share their opinions while developing their reading and writing and creative skills. All the proceeds from the magazine are used for charitable and educational purposes. And if you go to the first tab, this one is definitely appropriate mostly for, I would say, middle to high school students. And the kids can come in here and either read the poetry that's been submitted by other kids, as well as having the option to submit their own poetry or work to Teen Ink. So, those were a couple of, that's a couple of the websites that you can have for the kids to use to publish their poetry when they finally make it through the process of writing and listening to their other poems. And now we're on to some poetry web resources.
Okay. Thank you, Nicole. At this point, does anyone have any questions so far? No questions, just give us a red X. If you have a question, type it into the text chat box, please. All right. We're going to look at a couple of web resources that are very useful for you as you are planning how to use technology with your students and as you're creating your lesson plans. I'm waiting for it to catch up with me. You should see a website. There we go. For Shel Silverstein. Now you have this website where you can actually scroll through it a little bit yourself and click on things rather than me taking you through it. I'm not doing an app share. I've actually shared the website with you. Some of the links on here, this is a couple years old, and some of the links don't work very well. The fun and games links, there are no fun and games there anymore. The page that does work, and which is useful for you, and you can do a little bit of research on Shel Silverstein. I know, especially if you teach elementary school or even middle school, and I've used Shel Silverstein as a high school English teacher. It is very engaging for the kids. The poems are fun, they love them, and they can be taught at all levels. They are really much more complex than sometimes we imagine. And so I don't want you to think just because you might be a high school teacher that you can't use the poetry of Shel Silverstein. I've done it in the classroom, and the kids love it, and it's a valuable experience for them. In the learning resources, though, there are some ideas for lesson plans and activities. And you have the power to scroll through these yourself right now, so I'm not going to do that for you. the top one that says Teach Shell is really useful. And if you click on the download button right now, you should be able to open up some lesson plan ideas. Let me see if that'll work. Give me a green check if you're able to do that. So I know I've never tried this way. Okay. It's working for some of you. And you'll notice that in the first section, the lesson plans, they're actually Common Core or Nevada Academic Content Standard aligned. So those are, good resources for you that you can use in your classroom and will help you help make that planning easier for you. And then if you continue to go down, so you can look at that resource later, and it should have popped up in a separate window for you, so you can go back and look at it on your own if you like. I'd just go ahead and, when we're done with our webinar, bookmark that window so that way you can come back to it if it's something that you're interested in. We're looking at several different texts and the lesson plans, everything on it. Runny Babbit, which is an entertaining one. Kids have to really think about it. Runny Babbit, Billy Sook. A lot of switching around the letters there that makes kids have to think about what they're reading and really pay attention to it. A Poetry Month kit that was from last year. Some materials on the Giving Tree. Poetry Workshop kit from 2013, from 2012, 2011, 2010, 2009, going back to 2008. So some good resources there that we can definitely reuse. Again, the only one that I saw as I was going through them that is Common Core aligned is that very first one. The next resource waiting for it to come up here for you. Here's your Poet BFF. Oh, and as I put the link in here, it did not go on right. So let me do an app share for you. I was going to have everybody take the little quiz right now and see who your Poetry BFF was. All right. This is a fun quiz that I think that your students would enjoy. It's just like the normal Facebook quizzes that you see to see which character from a movie you might be like or something like that. But this takes you through, and the link is on the symbol that we'll give you at the very end to see which poet you can most relate to. Now, as I took the quiz myself, I don't think the coaches would be very surprised to find that I'm most related to Edgar Allan Poe, who is one of my favorite poets. So a fun resource that will help get the kids engaged in thinking about poets, thinking about who they are, and as well to maybe find someone that they can connect to a little bit. This resource, the Teacher's First resource, which is all these are on the Symbaloo that we'll give you the link to, gives you some ideas for upper elementary, lower elementary, and middle elementary school teachers to use with poetry read-alouds, and how that you can get kids to read poetry aloud, to be able to recognize and appreciate the sound devices, to be able to help with comprehension. As a high school English teacher, my rule for reading poetry is you cannot understand a poem unless you've read it at least 3 times, and then you can just start to really appreciate it. So that reading aloud of poetry is so important, and so this gives you some ideas for that. The Poetry Readathon was another great resource that helps to have students engage with poetry one-on-one, rather than necessarily reading it aloud as a class and discussing it whole class. This allows students to do written responses to the poetry that they read, looking at the imagery, the sound devices, the content, the impact, and the tone and the mood of the poem. and to ask questions that they would ask of not only of the author, but questions that they just have of the poem in general. And so I really like the resources found in the Poetry Readathon, or the ideas of it. The resources, these PDF downloads, these links don't work right now. They're not live, but I think the concept of it that you find on this page is very useful. And Julie talked about Read, Write, Think from the National Council of Teachers of English. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of lesson plans on here that you can find. You see my search here is just poetry. I see 17 lesson plans for kindergarten, 22 for first grade, 23 for second grade. I get into the upper grades, more and more and more resources that are available. These are lesson plans that have been developed and tweaked by teachers, and that you can download, you can use, you can tweak yourself and use them, because there is no, as teachers we do it. We steal from other people all the time. We don't always have to reinvent everything for ourselves. And so please go back and look at the readwritethink.org and look at those resources and those plans that are available for teaching poetry. And we've talked a lot about exposing kids to poetry, and not a lot. I know what Marianne and Julie and Nicole talked about the publishing of poetry. Poetry is hard for kids to write. I think in elementary school, the kids have a much easier time writing poetry, because their imaginations are running wild as it is anyway. They've got lots of stories to tell you. I love going into an elementary school classroom and hearing the random comments from elementary school kids. After working with 16 and 17-year-olds for 11 years, and with 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds for 4 years, it's very refreshing to see that enthusiasm, that energy, and that creativity. But sometimes it is hard to get kids to write poetry, to have them come up with an idea. And this website, Creative Writing Now, has creative writing prompts that you can use to help kids get ideas for what they want to write about. And so maybe if I were using this in the classroom, I might not give all the kids the same prompt. I might give the kids 3 or 4 prompts and say, okay, you choose which one best fits your mood right now. Which one can you most relate to? And allow them to get those creative juices flowing with a little bit of a push. So some ideas that you can use, online resources for getting kids involved in poetry, because poetry is so much fun to write, and it's so much fun to read, and there's so much that we can teach with our language standards, so much our speaking and listening standards, through the use of poetry. And that's all I have. Any questions right now? You guys got a little bit of short webinar today, and that's okay. We're not going to keep going just for the sake of continuing. If you have a question, type it into the text chat box. I'm going to go ahead and do an app share to show you a short URL that you can use to access the Symbaloo. If you write down or take a screenshot of that URL, I'll leave it up there for a minute, it will allow you to access the Symbaloo with all of the resources that the coaches so graciously put together for you. So you can access it later on. It's the http://goo.gl/vz92hp. And thank you, Marianne, for putting it in the text chat box. All right. Thank you so much for your attendance today. If there are no questions, I'd like to thank Nicole and Julie and Lisa and Marianne for taking some time with us today. I'd like you to leave you with one last thing. If you would take our little survey to give us some feedback, we would definitely appreciate it. You can do it right there in that window in your session. And as soon as you are finished, if you'll just exit by clicking the red X that says exit at the top of your screen. If you're watching this in the playback, you can still take the survey, and you can make sure you click the log attendance and exit button in your bottom right-hand corner. And thank you so much.